The cabin lights flickered as turbulence rattled the plane. Passengers clutched their armrests, whispers of panic spreading like wildfire. At 30,000 feet, fear ruled, until one quiet voice spoke a call sign that froze the flight crew in place. Within seconds, the pilots straightened in respect, and then, to everyone's shock, they saluted. The hum of the engines was steady, almost comforting, as Flight 228 cruised smoothly at 30,000 feet. Most passengers had settled into the quiet monotony of a long-haul journey. Headphones in, blankets pulled tight, flight attendants quietly rolling carts down the aisle. It was, by all appearances, just another ordinary flight. Until it wasn't. The first jolt came suddenly, like the plane had struck an invisible wall. Drinks sloshed over plastic cups, laptops slid off trays, and startled gasps filled the air. The cabin lights flickered as the aircraft shuddered violently again, this time harder. A nervous laugh or two tried to pierce the tension, but no one was fooled. This wasn't normal turbulence. Within moments, the atmosphere shifted. Whispered questions turned into frantic voices. A child cried. A businessman grabbed for the overhead compartment in panic, only to be pulled back by a flight attendant urging him to stay seated. Fear, once whispered, had now taken root and was spreading fast. The captain's voice finally crackled over the intercom, strained but steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm and keep your seatbelts fastened. We're experiencing unexpected turbulence. Everything is under control." But his tone carried an edge that betrayed his words. Passengers exchanged looks. Everything is under control? It didn't sound like it. In row 17, a woman clutched her rosary. A young man frantically texted on his phone, ignoring the airplane mode rule, desperate to send a message through before signal dropped. A mother shielded her child with trembling arms. Fear was a living thing now, breathing heavily in every corner of the cabin. And yet, amid the storm of panic, one passenger sat perfectly still. No frantic movements. No wide-eyed fear. Just calm. His hands rested loosely on the armrests, his posture straight, his eyes steady. While others gripped their seats as though the plane might fall apart beneath them, he looked almost detached. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't ignorance. It was the quiet confidence of someone who had seen fear before and conquered it. A flight attendant, moving quickly down the aisle to calm passengers, noticed him. For a split second, their eyes met. Something about his composure struck her. Out of place, almost uncanny in this sea of chaos. The turbulence worsened, the plane groaning under invisible pressure, and panic boiled over. Someone shouted, "What's happening? Are we going down?" The calm passenger finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, he unbuckled his seatbelt and leaned forward, his voice low but firm, just enough to cut through the noise around him. And in that moment, with fear at its peak, he said something that made even the flight crew freeze. He spoke a call sign, a word so unexpected, so heavy with meaning, that silence spread through the chaos like a shockwave. The words seemed simple enough, just a short phrase spoken quietly, almost casually. But the effect was immediate. The flight attendant who had been struggling to calm a panicked passenger froze in her tracks. Her eyes widened as though she had misheard, then narrowed with recognition. She leaned in closer. "What did you just say?" she whispered. The man repeated it, this time louder, steadier. "A call sign. Not a name. Not a rank. A call sign." And suddenly, the atmosphere inside the cabin shifted. The pilot's door cracked open, something that rarely happened mid-flight, especially during turbulence. The first officer stepped out, his face pale, his grip firm on the frame of the cockpit. His eyes swept the cabin until they landed on the man in row 17. "You," the officer said, voice tight. "Say it again." The passenger met his gaze, calm and unflinching, and repeated the call sign a third time. The words carried weight, an authority unspoken yet undeniable. The officer stiffened. His hand instinctively moved to his forehead, half salute, half reflex, before he caught himself, realizing where he was. But the slip was enough. The murmurs began instantly. Passengers who had been sobbing moments earlier now looked around in confusion. "What's going on?" someone asked. "Why did the pilot salute him?" another demanded. The turbulence still rattled the plane, but suddenly it didn't feel like the greatest threat. The greatest mystery was sitting calmly among them. The captain's voice came again over the intercom, but this time it was different. The authority in his tone had sharpened, almost reverent. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask for your continued cooperation and calm. Everything is under control." The words sounded genuine this time, because the captain wasn't just speaking to passengers. He was speaking to him, the man in row 17. The flight attendant approached cautiously, lowering her voice so others couldn't hear. "Sir, with respect, are you who I think you are?" The man didn't answer directly. He just gave a small, knowing nod. It was all the confirmation she needed. Her posture straightened instantly, professionalism replacing panic. She glanced back at the cockpit door. The officer was still watching, eyes steady, body tense like a soldier before his commanding officer. The whispers grew louder. "Who is he? Why are the pilots reacting like that? What does that call sign mean?" The man didn't indulge their curiosity. He simply leaned back in his seat, his calm presence radiating stronger than before. And just like that, panic began to lose its grip on the cabin. The passengers didn't know why. They didn't understand the significance of that call sign, but they could feel the respect it commanded, and for the first time since the turbulence began, they believed they might actually be safe. The storm outside raged on, but inside the plane, silence now hung heavier than fear. All eyes turned to row 17, the man who carried a call sign that could make pilots salute. For several long minutes, the cabin remained caught in a strange stillness. The turbulence hadn't stopped, but the fear had. What replaced it wasn't comfort. It was curiosity, and a heavy respect that no one could quite explain. Finally, the first officer stepped fully into the aisle. His expression was no longer the strained mask of a pilot holding things together. It was the face of a man standing before someone who had earned more than respect, someone who had earned reverence. "Sir," the officer said, steadying himself as the plane shook again, "on behalf of this crew, it's an honor." And then, in full view of the passengers, he raised his hand in a crisp salute. A collective gasp swept the cabin. A salute on a commercial flight at 30,000 feet. It was unthinkable. The man in row 17 inclined his head, not boastful, not surprised, just quietly accepting. He didn't return the salute. Not because he disrespected it, but because he didn't need to. His very presence was acknowledgement enough. The whispers now had shape. "He's military." No, not just military. He's someone important. That call sign, it means something. The truth, though only partly known, was that this passenger had once commanded the skies. The call sign he carried wasn't just a nickname, it was a legend. It belonged to a decorated combat pilot whose missions had turned the tide in places most civilians would never hear about, whose skill and leadership had earned not just medals, but the kind of respect that outlives uniforms and battlefields. Most passengers didn't know the details, but they could feel the weight of it in the way trained aviators reacted to him. The captain himself emerged from the cockpit then, something almost unheard of in rough conditions. His posture was straight, his chin high, but his eyes carried humility. He walked down the aisle slowly, each passenger leaning out to watch. When he reached row 17, he stopped, heels clicking together softly on the cabin floor. With full formality, the captain saluted. The silence was absolute now. Then, almost as quickly as he had come, the captain nodded, placed a hand on the man's shoulder, a gesture of both respect and camaraderie, and returned to the cockpit. The officer followed, leaving the passengers in stunned awe. The turbulence still rocked the plane, but the mood had shifted entirely. Fear had no place here anymore. Not when they realized that among them sat a man who had faced far worse at higher stakes and lived to carry a call sign that still commanded respect in the skies. The mother holding her child relaxed, as though reassured by his mere presence. The businessman put away his frantic texts. Even the child who had been crying earlier was quiet now, watching the calm passenger with wide eyes, as though sensing the gravity of who he was. And as the plane steadied, as the storm outside finally began to ease, the truth settled over everyone like a blanket of awe. Heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they sit quietly in row 17, saying nothing at all, until the sky itself seems to bow in recognition.